Having spent a lot of time getting through the argumentative elements for your persuasive speech, I now want to turn to analyzing arrangement, thinking about how you're going to put the speech together in a way that makes sense. And in the next lecture, I'm going to have you double check your arrangement, specifically with argument congruency in mind. But this speech is not as laid out as or at least formally laid out, as the impromptu or in the informative speeches. There, clarity of arrangement was key. Here, we're more concerned with effect. Okay? Does the arrangement advance your goals in the speech? And in many cases, in a stylistically rich speech, some of that arrangement talk falls by the wayside, not as a bad thing, but as a strategic choice. So regardless of how your speech is arranged, for this speech, your audience should be able to answer these questions. What are the ills? Who or what's to blame for these ills? What are the cures? And what can we do to help implement those cures? Okay? So you might have other aspects in there. You might have consequences. But at the bare minimum, I want your audience to be able to answer those questions. Those are sort of really key points in your persuasive case. So I've got a couple of recommendations, suggestions, ideas about how you might arrange the main points in your speech. Now, what I'm going to show you here, just because we don't have a whole bunch of space on the screen to my right, is I'm just going to show you the main points here. If you go to the web page, the weekly web page, I have a document there that shows these arrangement patterns with the main points as well as the subpoints. Okay, so you have a richer understanding of what the subpoints might actually look like. But these are just some ideas about how you might choose to arrange that persuasive case. So we'll start with ill, blame, cure. This is a straight up needs case. When we watched and listened to, it was an audio clip, when we listened to that Obama speech last week, this was the basic structure of his speech. Ill, blame, cure. He had consequences in there as well. So in this hypothetical one, so people have argued for or against the educational package in the U.S. called No Child Left Behind. So people would be able to argue, ill, No Child Left Behind hurts our communities. Okay? And then they get into it. Well, why is it doing that? Well, No Child Left Behind is vague. And then finally they'd say, well, so therefore what do we do? Well, we have to change No Child Left Behind. And here what you can do is you can develop a specific cure and then its related call to action. So we need to change the legislation, contact your legislator. We need to support local school districts. Here's how you can do it. Whatever you choose to do there. I'm not making an argument for or against No Child Left Behind. This is merely an example of one way in which you might organize that case. Now, in other cases, maybe you don't need blame, or maybe you want to devote your attention elsewhere. So an argument that's made often here is we must protect our Second Amendment right to bear arms. So here, the blame is not really all that necessary in the development of this motivational speech. The ill is gun restrictions threaten our rights and our lives. So it's a presence-absence case. So if the presence of gun restrictions is what's at threat, the absence is kind of what's going to make it go away. So here you've got a pretty straightforward ill cure. So gun restrictions threaten our rights, therefore we must defend our right to bear arms by not having these gun restrictions, and here's what you can do to help make sure that we don't have these burdensome, onerous gun restrictions. By the way, actually, I take this and I use this as an example because I've had students run this speech plenty of times, both for and against gun restrictions. And one bears repeating. So when I do this speech here at the University of Washington, the students have to deliver it outside. So we've got a space in the middle of campus, so we're an urban campus, so we've got a lot of people milling around. It's called Red Square, not the Red Square in Moscow, but different one. And it's a good place for doing this. So every couple of months, my class is out there. Hundreds of people are out there declaiming. Not all at once, but they're doing their speeches outside. And I really like it, especially in the spring, because we get lots of tourist groups that come through, and it's a beautiful campus. Well, one time I had somebody basically making this case about we should, not have gun restrictions. And one of his calls to action, by the way, was buy a gun and join the NRA. So, he had developed it. It was fine. It was a good speech. I was out there watching it, as I often do, and there was a huge tour group moving through. And they didn't know what was going on, so they're walking by, and then they stop, and he's in front of the library, and he's got an audience, and they just start taking pictures. And I'm watching, and the whole time I'm thinking, like, this tourist group is going to go back, and they're going to say, Those Americans, they love two things: freedom of speech, because they're just always talking, and guns. They're talking about guns all the time. So I thought that was a great speech, but I do worry it gave that particular group of foreign visitors a slightly skewed understanding of what happens in the U.S. generally and at the University of Washington. Nevertheless, it's a good model for an advocacy speech. It's pretty straightforward: ill and cure. We can also talk to a motivated sequence. This has been something that's been kicked around in speech and the teaching of speech for a while. So maybe you've got an introduction that demonstrates, that gains attention. Once you've got that, then you'd prove need. We can talk about this as ill. It's often referred to as need. So in this case, arguing about getting advertisers out of public school classrooms, the need would be commercial education hurts students. And then what do we need to do? Well, we need to kick advertisers out of the classroom. So there's a one-to-one correlation there. They're present, they need to be absent. What makes the motivated sequence difference is then we can think through, well, being very explicit about what would implementation look like. So you've got this visualization step. So you say, well, here's what, if we truly kicked, in this case, if we truly kicked commercialized education out of classrooms, what would those classrooms look like? How would life be better? So you're just sort of drawing us a mental picture of what the world looks like once your cure is implemented. You can certainly think of a fairly famous speech that has a visualization step. It's almost as if he was talking about a dream. But I mean, as part of I Have a Dream, you've got this very elaborate working up of what implementation looks like, that visualization step. And in this model, then, you end with the call to action. And these are variable, right? You could swap these pieces around. You could have the call to action before visualization. But it's just a way of highlighting how you might want to think about writing and performing this picture of what the world looks like after your cure has been implemented. You can also think about sort of satisfying shared values. So every couple of years, if there's a nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court, there's a debate over rules and how the nomination process goes through. And this argument that you see here in terms of arguing for or against the nomination process, it's argued both by Republicans and Democrats here in the U.S. Most recently, it was by the Democrats, right? So they would start off by saying, well, we believe in fair hearings, their statement of the shared value. Currently, this process is being violated. So you've got the ill, right? This ill is at risk. So we need to act to preserve our shared value, the cure. And now here's what you can do. So it's an ill-cure model, but instead of just talking generally about sort of the tangible issues, you're setting up the evaluative criteria you're going to use for discussion of this policy. In this case, whatever our shared values are, fair nominations. Finally, one thing you might consider if you are running counter-arguments is thinking about how you're going to build that in. So here you could start off by saying, in this case, we're talking about nuclear energy. Opponents of nuclear energy are worried about this. Then you've got your counter-argument responding to those concerns about nuclear energy. Then you've got an ill, well, right now we're missing out on all the benefits of nuclear energy. And then you can build in that cure and call to action in one step. So these are just some ideas for arranging your speech in a persuasive way. And if you haven't already, go ahead and try to outline a basic argument for your speech. And this could be for this assignment, or it could be another related speech. But regardless, your audience should be able to answer at the end of that speech, what are the ills, who or what's to blame for these ills? What are the cures, and what can we do to help implement the cures? So I want you to get that in order, because in the next lecture, we're going to be checking that outline, checking that argument for congruency.